is my channel, The Fancy Hat Lady Reads. I am wearing one of my fancy booktube hats, and today I am doing my long-delayed series review of a series that I read in its entirety last year, 2022. Oh, strong opinions? And if you know me and my reading habits at all, you will understand, I think, how incredibly unusual that is for me to read an entire series that is like more than a couple books long. This is 5 books, including the one spin-off novel. In 1 year, I tend to read series much more slowly than that, even when they're completed series. And this is the Stariel series by A.J. Lancaster. The first book is The Lord of Stariel. The second book is The Prince of Secrets. The third book is The Court of Mortals. The fourth book is The King of Fairy. And the spin-off novel is A Rake of His Own. A.J. Lancaster is a New Zealand author, one of several I learned about during panels at the virtual Con Zealand from a couple years ago, where I was like taking notes on New Zealand authors I should read. And so far, like, this series, this author is the biggest win for me from those recommendations. This series ticks a lot of my boxes for like a compulsive comfort read. These are romance-heavy fae fantasy that skews towards fantasy of manners, at least for the main series. The first book is definitely very fantasy of manners, and I think you can make a case that that holds pretty strongly throughout the first 4 books, even as the magical and political stakes are raised. When I first picked this book up, I would have thought this title would have been pronounced The Lord of Stariel, just based on how it's spelled. I'm going with Stariel, though, as the pronunciation based on context. It is a reference to stars, and that is a recurring reference throughout with regards to this family and their magical family estate. I always try with a series review to be as spoiler-free as possible for the series as a whole and for each individual book within a series. In this case, I'm going to tell you right away that this series is going to be impossible to discuss beyond book 1 without giving away one major spoiler from book 1. So that will be happening in this video. Make your decisions about whether or not you need to click away accordingly. So the setting for this book is a fantasy world that feels like very early 19th century England. It is kind of one of those England with the serial numbers filed off fantasy settings. The vibe of book 1 in particular is very Downton Abbey. Our protagonist is Hedda, a young woman who is the daughter of the lord of a magical estate, but she and her family had a falling out years ago. She ran away from home and went to the big city to become a stage illusionist because she has strong illusion magic, and that's what she wanted to do instead of being a proper young lady. So she hasn't been back home to her family's northern estate of Stariel in a very long time, but at the beginning of the book, her father has died, which means she has to go back to Stariel for the gathering of the family, where the estate, because it is a magical estate, is going to choose its next lord. Hedda is clearly not one of the favored candidates. Everyone thinks it's probably going to be either her older brother Marius, who was also on bad terms with their father, or their cousin Jack, who was their father's favorite and has the strongest magical connection with the estate. And there is a lot of family drama that ensues. The family drama is front and center here. There is Hedda and Marius's stepmother, and their younger half-siblings. There is cousin Jack, there is his mother, who is, you know, nosy and terrible and has strong opinions about everybody and how they should be conducting themselves. All of this extended family converged upon the estate, and of course it's going to turn out that the next lord is going to be Hedda, who's not prepared for it at all. And how is she going to manage her family's opinions of her and the estate's finances? And a surprise magical fae threat because, hey, it turns out the fae are real. This world has been sealed off from fairy for, like, a long time. But as we are told in the prologue, right at the beginning, so this is not a spoiler, the Iron Law, which kept the fae world separate from the mortal world, has been revoked, and the fae are now once again allowed to enter the mortal realm. None of the humans know this. None of them believe that the fae are real. So the thing where I do have to give you a spoiler has to do with the romance plot, because the central romance in this series is kind of the whole point. In this book, we're set up with kind of a potential love triangle where there are two handsome suitors for Hedda's attention, one of whom is the wealthy neighbor who Hedda had a crush on when she was growing up, and the other is her close childhood friend Wynne, who was a servant of the family when they were kids and is now the family butler. He is the love interest, and he is secretly a fae prince in hiding. There is absolutely no way to discuss the rest of the series without telling you these things. Hedda and Wynne are very cute together. They are friends to lovers, which I have a soft spot for. The progression of their relationship is probably the major focus of the four main books in the series. They are together by the end of book one, but their relationship is secret, and we see that relationship challenged over the course of the rest of the series because they have to figure out how they can actually be together as like a scandalous lady lord and a fae prince turned butler. There are all sorts of challenges in their way. Technically, the main plot of book one is this mystery intrigue that has to do with the actual choosing of the new lord itself, but that's wrapped up by the end of book one, and it's not relevant to the rest of the series. Book two, The Prince of Secrets, does a bit of a switch up in terms of the point of view. I think that book one was 100% Hedda's point of view, and this is about 50-50 Hedda and Wynne. As the title suggests, this is all about Wynne's secrets and what he's gonna do about them. One of the tropes that this series does that I really enjoyed the execution of, because it's a trope that I'm a sucker for, but I get mad if it's not done well, is the whole secret identity thing. And what I mean by that is that if you've got a story that hinges on a secret identity, then the payoff comes from how the reveals are handled. And if the first reveal is not like a broad public reveal, there will be a series of reveals, plural, as that character's identity becomes known to a wider and wider circle of people. And that's what you get in this book, is you have that circle of people who know who Wynne really is, expanding gradually until at the end of the book, everyone in the family knows. That continues in book three, The Court of Mortals, where by the end of this book, his identity is public knowledge. But back to book two, I did appreciate the way this identity reveal trope was handled. It felt both emotionally satisfying in the sort of tropey way that I wanted, and also like true to the characters. This is also the book where we start to meet a larger number of fae characters. We start to get to know Wynne's family, whereas the first book was all about Hedda's. There is a major conflict between fae realms, and Wynne's past that he is running from is involved in that. What I have to say about the fae in this series is this is not the series to read if you need your fae to be incomprehensible to the human mind and frightening and scary because of that. Don't get me wrong, I like that type of fae story. Give me a mysterious, weird, incomprehensible fae story. But I do enjoy this as well. The fae characters in these books can be frightening because they are powerful. These are characters with both a lot of magic power and a lot of power in fae society. They are royalty. They belong to opposing fae courts engaged in bloody conflict. Like, there's a lot of scary stuff going on. Fae magic can be really frightening to mortals who are not used to it. The humans in these books, there is normal human magic, like Hedda is an illusionist, and she also has some pyromancy. So there's normal mortal magic, and then there's fae magic, which we understand to be different and operate by different rules. And the fae have some powers in these books that are truly frightening. But the fae characters in this series have to fundamentally make sense as people, just like the human characters, for the romance to work. And this is a romance series. So these are relatively accessible, relatable fae as far as fae go. Book 3, The Court of Mortals, deals more with the human politics side of things than we get in the first 2 books. As a lord, Hedda has to get permission from the queen in order to marry, and that is going to be complicated for her and Wyn. They have to travel to the capital city where things do not go according to plan. This is also the book where the fae court that is Wyn's homeland has its own sort of succession crisis that mirrors what happened in book 1 with Stariel. The court of 10,000 spires needs a new ruler, and so the sibling strife with Wyn and his siblings, some of whom are sympathetic, some of whom are not, reaches greater heights than ever before. And then the final book, The King of Fairy, which is extremely chunky compared to the others, but I still found to be an incredibly quick read. All of these books for me are very easy reading, quick to breeze through. They are page turners without too much that's really heavy in them. Anyways, this is the book where Wyn needs permission from the High King of Fairy in order to marry Hedda. And this is where I'm going to tell you what I rated these books. I gave each of the 4 books in the main series 4 stars. I gave 4 stars to each of the first 3, sort of expecting that book 4 would be the culmination of the series that I would love so much that I would give this the sort of crowning 5 stars for the series as a whole, which I sort of sometimes do when I'm really enjoying a series where each individual book doesn't quite get up to 5 stars for me. I'll sort of reserve that 5 stars for the final book. There was a reason that I couldn't give this book that 5 stars. I guess this is another spoiler, so I should have said at the beginning that there were going to be 2 spoilers I was going to give in this entire series review. At the very end of book 3, like the cliffhanger at the end of book 3, was a surprise magical pregnancy plot twist, which I personally did not appreciate. And then this book, book 4, deals heavily with the potential complications of this surprise magical pregnancy. I do not enjoy this trope. Pregnancies that are like a surprise for any of the characters involved in fiction I find very stressful. And then the added potential pregnancy complications stakes I also find very stressful. Now, the reason I still enjoyed this book as much as I did is because at this point I had read enough of this author's writing to be confident with regards to how this situation was going to play out. This is fundamentally not the type of storytelling that's going to throw a dangerous pregnancy at a character who does not want that pregnancy. By that same logic, this is fundamentally not the type of story that's going to let that wanted pregnancy end in a miscarriage or cause any serious harm to the mother. Like, none of that is going to happen. You know that she's going to be fine and her pregnancy is going to be fine. And the only question is how. That said, this is not a trope I enjoy. And this is something where I really appreciate that A.J. Lancaster has decided for the spin-off novel to add a content advisory page, because the first 4 books did not have those, and I think this is an upgrade in that regard. There are, thinking back, other things in these books that were comfort reads for me, absolutely, that would make them not so for other people, where content warnings could be helpful. In the first book, for example, there is a queer character who is forcibly outed to a family member in a blackmail attempt. I could see that being the shocking, unpleasant surprise for some other reader that the surprise magical pregnancy in peril was for me. And one of the things where I know I sort of have a shortcoming as a reviewer is I'm not incredibly well attuned to the range of things in books that readers may want to get content warnings for from a reviewer. You will have noticed I am not a reviewer, and there are people on BookTube and elsewhere who will give you like a full list of content warnings for every book they review. I can't do that because I know I will miss things, and I don't want to be responsible for someone going into a book and being surprised by something that they thought I would have warned them about. So I really appreciate authors providing lists of content warnings that they think apply to a book, because that takes away the responsibility from me as a reviewer to be watching out for those things and flagging them all. So to wrap up the portion of the video that is my review of this 4-book series, overall, I think the greatest strength of this series is the characters and their relationships, both the central romance and the family dynamics. This author writes great dialogue. The banter throughout is top-notch. The stakes do increase significantly over the course of the series, but even when we've got these big magical and political stakes, like, the characters are still very worried about the sort of everyday things, like how are we going to get the loan from the bank to fix up the estate? And that's where I think that it stays really grounded in fantasy of manners, which is where it started. What do our families think of our scandalous relationship? What do the gossip papers think of our scandalous relationship? How many hoops do we have to jump through, both on the human society and fae society side of things, to be able to get married? The biggest, main concern of the series is not necessarily the fae war happening in the background. It's whether all of those high stakes context things are going to keep our main couple from being able to get married, because that's what's important to the reader, to the author. And then, in a broader sense, how are these two societies, human society and fae society, going to adjust to being in contact again after they've not had anything to do with each other for so much time? Not only how will peace be brokered, but then how will characters from these two different worlds interact with each other with their vastly different social expectations? So book 1 was, I think, all Hedda's POV. Book 2 was mostly Hedda and Wynne, although I think we got our first chapter from Marius's perspective in book 2. Marius becomes a major point of view character in books 3 and 4, I think, and then I think book 4 has another character's POV added into it as well. I may be forgetting some POV chapters from other characters, but those are definitely the main ones. So it feels really natural that the spin-off book, A Rake of His Own, is Marius's book. This is the book for the secondary romance couple. I think it becomes clear around book 3 that Marius, who is Hedda's older brother, and Bracken, who is one of Wynn's older brothers, are the secondary romance plotline of the series, but they don't get together by the end of the main 4 books. This is the book that I felt was not really a fantasy of manners in the same way that the main 4 are. Like, the banter is still there. The setting is still this quasi-historical England with magic, but not. But this is really a fae romance murder mystery. And this is the bit of this review where I'm going to take issue a little bit, just a little bit, with the marketing of this particular book. And I say this kindly with the understanding that this is a self-published series and the author needs to sell books without the help of a traditional publishing marketing budget. I understand. However, I'm going to focus on 3 things. This is advertised as 1, steamy, 2, enemies to lovers, and 3, standalone. I'm gonna address the claim that this works as a standalone first. Technically, I'm sure you could read this without having read the main series and you would be able to follow the plot. Like, that's not the issue. I personally, though, would not recommend picking up this book without reading the main series first. And I say that because I loved this book. This is the book that I gave the culminating 5 stars for the whole series to. I would not have enjoyed this book nearly as much as I did were it not for my pre-existing investment in these characters. The main couple of this book, yes, but also their sibling relationships with the previous couple of the main series. Marius's lifelong friendship with Wynn, which was heavily strained during the previous events of the series, and then has been repaired, and like they get very little page time together in this book, but when they do get to interact, like, I'm very invested in that friendship. And then, of course, this couple, Marius and Bracken, they have been bickering flirtatiously with each other for 3 books already by the time we get to this point. And you are told that backstory exists, but it is different to be told it than to already come in with a pre-existing attachment. Okay, point number 2 on the marketing. This is described as a second chance enemies to lovers. Usually to me, second chance implies that, like, they were together in the past. In this case, they have failed spectacularly to get together in the past. I would also not categorize this as enemies to lovers. One of the chapter titles in this book actually tells you exactly what it is. It is antagonistic acquaintances to lovers. The chapter titles here are exquisite, extraordinary, perfect. The main series did not have chapter titles, and I miss them in retrospect, having gotten chapter titles here. Also, the title of this book is a very clever 3-way pun. The love interest Bracken's nickname is Rake. He is, by character archetype, a rake. There is also a prominently featured garden rake, because Marius is a botanist and this is a magical botany murder mystery. And then the third point, is this steamy? Definitely more so than any of the prior 4 books individually, but if you'll notice, the main series was unsteamy enough that I didn't feel like I needed to mention, like, steaminess level for any of those books in reviewing that series at all. It, like, didn't even come to my mind. And there are sex scenes in the later books of the main series. Nothing in the first book, but the subsequent books get a little steamier with each one, I'd say. And I would say that this follows that progression of being a little steamier than the late books in the main series, but given that this is already marketed as a romance novel, I did not find it exceptionally steamy. There are 2 on the page sex scenes, I think, and the first one doesn't happen until full, like, halfway through. All I'm saying is that for something explicitly marketed as steamy, it could have gone quite a ways further and I wouldn't have felt like I had been lied to. But what is going on in this book? Who are these characters? Marius, as we've previously established, is Hedda's older brother, and he is a botanist. He is studying at a university that, because this is fake England, is called Knoxbridge. His studies had been previously interrupted by the need to be at Stariel for family affairs, and he's feeling like he's very behind in life. He hasn't really achieved anything he wants to achieve. His younger sister, whom he loves dearly, is suddenly very important, and he is not. And then on top of it all, at this point in the story, he has some emerging and rapidly developing telepathic powers that are causing him a lot of distress. Because of the telepathy thing, this book can narratively get away with being mostly from Marius's POV. Rake was not a point of view character at any point during the main series, so this is the first we get of his POV. We get very few, like, true POV chapters from him, though. Mostly we are picking things up about him via Marius and Marius's out-of-control telepathy. So at the beginning of this book, Marius is feeling very sorry for himself, and then Rake shows up inexplicably out of nowhere. Then there is a magical murder in Marius's greenhouse. One of the fellow members of his botany department is suddenly dead. Fey magic is involved. This is naturally very concerning. Marius and Rake have to solve the murder together in order to appease the higher-ups who are trying to negotiate peace between mortal and fairy. Meanwhile, Rake is trying to help Marius with the telepathy problem. Peril and romance ensue. As I said earlier, this was the book in the series that I gave 5 stars to. I don't know if this will be the last book in this greater overarching series, or if there will possibly be more spin-offs. I could envision more spin-off books featuring other members of these 2 families. There is definitely a deep enough roster of interesting supporting characters to support further books. I could also see this being the first in a spin-off series of Marius and Racken murder mysteries. So although there are no current announcements for more books, I remain, like, cautiously hopeful. That said, if AJ Lancaster wants to branch out and write something totally different after this, I would also be intrigued. So this has been my review of this 5-book series as it is right now. This is definitely a series I would love to see more people reading and talking about. If you've read these books, let me know what you thought. Anyhow, I hope you're having a very nice day. That is all. Bye for now.